Alright, so in this video we're going to be making 30 liters of mash today, cornmeal mash. I'm just going to show you what we're going to be using first. Not a whole lot you really need to make mash. This one here in the back, that's our cornmeal. It's going to be 2.5 kg of cornmeal. Again, I apologize for the kg. For all of you back in America, you'll just have to do the conversions. So our best recipe so far has been 2.5 kg cornmeal with 3 kg of sugar. We're going to be using our classic turbo yeast. We'll probably do another video on yeast, just yeast in particular. So look for that a little bit later. This is amylase enzyme. You'll have to look that up, but you'll need this to help with the starch in the cornmeal. It helps to ferment the starch. And then we have just a little thermometer. That's going to be making sure that we have our water temperature right, and then of course we just have our, we're going to have to heat up some water. And that's pretty much it. We have our stirrer there. That's pretty, definitely homemade. We're going to have to get us a better one. And we have our 30-liter barrel. One thing that I did forget to mention when I was showing you everything that we're going to be using today is this airlock, which will go on the top of our mash barrel like this one here. This mash is working off now, and that's just an airlock that fits down into the top. Basically lets air out but doesn't let air in. So the first thing you're going to want to do is to go ahead and heat up some water. We're making 30 liters of mash today. It's important to note that when you're making mash, you don't have to heat up the entire 30 liters. For example, today I'm just going to be heating up probably about 4 liters of water, and I'll pour that boiling hot water onto my cornmeal and sugar and stir that up real good. Once I've stirred that up really good, I will add regular room temperature water to it. What that'll do is that'll also bring the temperature of the mash down to a point where we can start putting in our yeast and our amylase. Now I'm making this mash here myself today. It's important to note that if you have someone helping you, then it's probably best to go ahead and pour your hot water in and then just slowly add your cornmeal and stuff. It's a little bit easier to stir up that way. One technique that I've found though is if you're by yourself is pour your cornmeal in first, pour your sugar on top of that, then pour your boiling hot water in. It mixes up a little bit easier and it doesn't really clump up like that. Also note too that if you're reusing mash barrels like we're doing, make sure that you clean those out really good, because if one bad strain of yeast gets left in there, it could sour your whole mash. So make sure your mash barrels are nice and clean like this one. So I've poured my sugar in on top of my cornmeal. Now I'm just waiting for my water to start to boil. Once that gets to boiling, I'll just dump that in here on top of my cornmeal and my sugar and start stirring. So while I'm waiting on my water to come to a boil, I want to explain a little bit more about this enzyme. The traditional moonshiners, when they were making their mash, what they would use is cracked corn. They would sprout the corn. They would lay it out onto like cloth or burlap or something like that, and they'd keep it wet for a few days, and that corn will sprout. Inside that sprout is an enzyme that helps to actually break down the starches in the corn itself into sugars which can be fermented. Since we're just using regular cornmeal, it's important that we put this enzyme in there because that is going to help us break down the starches in the corn itself. Alright, so now that my water is boiling, I'm about to pour it in here to my sugar and cornmeal mixture and start stirring it up. Alright, so my water's boiling nicely. I'm about to pour it into my cornmeal and sugar mixed here. One thing to note is be careful at this point. Last week, or maybe a couple weeks ago, when I was doing this, I accidentally spilled some of this water on my foot. It's still healing up now, but that didn't feel too nice. So, anytime you're dealing with some boiling hot water, be careful. Alright, so I got my wife here. She's going to help hold the camera while I stir this up. And all you're going to be doing is you're just going to keep stirring until you don't see any clumps. So just stir away. Alright, so my wife is here. She's going to help hold the camera for me. What you're going to do is you're just going to stir this mixture up until you don't see any clumps. It'll take a little while, just get it nice and stirred up, drag it around the bottom, make sure there's nothing stuck on the bottom. Alright, so we've been stirring for about 10 minutes. There's no clumps in here now. It's nice and stirred up. It's good consistency. We're about to add more water to this barrel. This barrel is only about a quarter of the way full right now. So we're going to fill it all up, not to the top, and I'm going to explain a little bit later why you don't want to do that, especially when you're using an airlock. But we're going to put more water in this, and that'll bring the temperature down. Now it's important that you don't have the temperature too high when you add your yeast. Adding your yeast when the temperature is above 40 degrees Celsius will cause your yeast to foul out. I don't know the technical term of it, but I have had that happen where I added the yeast when the temperature was too hot, and it just started producing a very foul odor. I had to throw the mash away. So it's important that you do not add yeast above 40 degrees Celsius. You really want to be around probably 32 degrees Celsius, somewhere between 32 and 36. A little bit warm, but not hot, and that will activate the yeast. And at that point, it's good to just let it go on at like room temperature. I'll talk a little bit more about temperatures later, though, with mash. Alright, so we finished putting the water into the mash, and I said I was going to explain to you why you don't want to fill your mash barrel all the way up, especially if you're using an airlock system like what we're using, is because a couple weeks back we had one of these mash barrels, in fact, the top just blew off of it, and mash went everywhere. It was fruit mash. It's actually watermelon peach, which I don't recommend. Top blew off of it. There was fruit mash everywhere, all over the place in our shop. It must have been a hell of an eruption. Anyway, the bad part about it is that it sat there for about 2 days before it was discovered. I honestly thought we were never going to get rid of that smell or the fruit flies, which we eventually did. But yeah, the reason that happened was because our airlock, and I'm not really prepared for this. Let me grab an airlock. Was because with that watermelon peach mash, there was a lot of debris in there. What happened was the water level was up too much, and imagine if you have your top on this and this is sticking down in there a little bit too. There you go. That's sticking down in there a little bit. There was so much debris, and once this thing starts working off, it's really going. It's bubbling, and there's a lot of stuff going on. Some debris got caught down into the bottom of this, blocked it up. There was nowhere for the pressure to go from the yeast fermenting, and it just blew the top right off. So, lesson learned, please excuse the noise outside, is that you don't fill your mash barrel all the way to the top when you're using airlocks, or not even close to the top. Alright, so again, before you add your enzyme and before you add your yeast, you want to make sure that your mash is at the right temperature. Since we've added the water in with our hot water, our temperature right now is around 36 degrees Celsius. That's pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and just add the amylase first, and then I'll add the yeast. Now with our enzyme, what I'm just going to do is I'm not, it's no bother to even measure this out really. I'm doing it sort of an old school method in which you just sort of lightly sprinkle it around the top. Just kind of cover the top with a little sprinkle. Doesn't take that much. That should be enough. I'll do my yeast much the same way. So I'm about to add my yeast. Sort of like the enzyme, I'm just going to basically cover the entire top with just a little tiny layer. In fact, that's about all I have left in this bag anyway. That should be enough though, and what I'll do now is just stir this up. At that point, I'm just going to cap it off and put my airlock in, and it's ready to sit. It can vary. It can vary from 3, 4, up to 7+ days with this running. One good way of noticing if it's running is just watching your airlock and if it's bubbling. That's not always 100% because even sometimes you're going to have air leaks. Could be anywhere, so your airlock might not always be bubbling. And that's fine. I mean, basically what you're trying to do is keep any kind of critters or anything out of it. So yeah, I'm going to stir this up and then we'll come back and see the next step. Alright, so it's capped off. I'll stick my airlock in. I'll hang around a little bit and see if this thing starts bubbling. It should start bubbling, it should start building up pressure relatively quickly. Let you see what that looks like. So we're looking at our airlock right now. It's been about 2 hours since we added our yeast to the mash. As you can see, we have pressure that's already built up enough to start coming out of the airlock. That means our yeast is working. It's consuming the sugar, it's producing alcohol.